Well, hello. This is an episode for Patreon where I wanted to share with you some books that I think are really important, and not that you necessarily have to get them or have to read all of them, but in your quest to learn more about icons, I think that these 4 books would really fill out your knowledge in a beautiful way. The first one is by Michelle Quinault, and it's called The Icon, Window on the Kingdom. And it's got, the beginning chapter about the basics is really, really good, I think. And it's much more than I'm able to give in a class or even in a series of classes. Because it's just got, it's very thorough. And I just love this book. I think it's just really great. So anyway, I suggest that this would be a really good book for you. You'll learn about the festal icons. It describes each of the festal icons. That refers to the 12 great feasts in the Orthodox Church. So if you wanted to compile a list of icons that you wanted to complete in your life, I would suggest this is a good list to consider. And she does have descriptions of them, really nice kind of in detail explanations of the symbolism and so forth. There's the entry into Jerusalem, the presentation in the temple, and quite a bit more. Talks here about the canons of iconography, their necessity and purpose, and general facts about the icon. Talks here, remember how I've talked to you before about the absence of naturalism? And that's super important in understanding the difference between an icon and a picture or painting. And there's some other things here. You can see I have this book heavily marked everywhere. Perspective, it tells you about the perspective, about light, colors, the symbolic nature of some of the colors. I've marked this book up quite a bit too, because that's something I've been doing quite a lot, is I mark up my book so that when I want to find something, I can find it quickly. Here's the symbolism of colors. As a symbol of spiritual regeneration, green is frequently the color of the prophets and of John the Evangelist, all of whom are heralds of the Holy Spirit. To have leafed through a book about icons only once is sufficient to realize how much green contributes to the painting of those it helps to portray, and so forth, with different colors. And then she has in here an analysis of several icons, which goes really into depth into some of the more famous ones. The icon of the crucifixion and the harrowing of hell. So I really think this would be a great book to add to your library. When you have time to sit back, here's the theological elements of the icon. When you have time, to read a chapter or so, and it will really deepen your understanding and knowledge about icons. Another one I have here is similar. It's called Windows to Heaven, Introducing Icons to Protestants and Catholics, by Elizabeth Zelensky and Lila Gilbert. And I find this one very helpful when I give talks about icons, because, I'm a former Catholic, but now I'm a Protestant, and I converted to Protestantism when I got married to a Protestant. And I find that people who did not grow up with icons have a hard time understanding them. So I think this one is a great book for helping people who are not used to seeing icons and understanding some basic concepts. Like here, in the biblical Greek language, holy means set apart. And so, as Protestants claim, all Christians are indeed set apart for holiness through the process of sanctification. Throughout the centuries, however, there have been women and men who lived such exemplary lives that they serve as models. They're called saints in both the Catholic and Orthodox traditions, and they provide the kind of heroes and heroines for all believing Christians that are so sadly lacking in today's world. So you see what I mean? She puts it in terms that makes it very easy to understand. And I love some of her discussions about the different icons. Also, she goes pretty much into depth about Andrei Rublev's Holy Trinity and has one of the best explanations that I've found about why he painted that, because unity and harmony and grace, peace without end, is depicted in this icon of the Holy Trinity. So, trying to see. Yeah, this is what I was just referring to. I'll just read this little bit to you because it's so interesting. It was just 17 years after St. Sergius's death. St. Sergius of Verdona was his spiritual father, that the monastery requested an icon of the Holy Trinity from Andrei Rublev, who by then was a famous iconographer. The Holy Trinity Monastery had been Rublev's home from early childhood, so the theme of the Trinity would have been a familiar subject for him. Now he was chosen to express this theme in a public form. In every Orthodox church, the second icon to the left of the main altar gate, if you stand facing the iconostasis, called the temple icon, always depicts that event or person or manifestation of God to which that particular church is dedicated. Rublev's Holy Trinity became the temple icon of the Trinity Cathedral in the Trinity Sergius Monastery. This is in Russia, as it came to be known after the death of its founder. Now here's the part that I find really wonderful. While Rublev was doubtlessly following the inner voice of inspiration in his choice of subject, he was also giving substance to a deep-seated longing for peace and concord at all levels of society in strife-torn Muscovy. During Rublev's lifetime, 15th century Muscovy remained fraught with uncertainties. The church was split by accusations of heresy and so forth. In the face of all this, a curtain was lifted by Andrei Rublev, revealing a world of boundless and immeasurable peace. It was a revelation of everything Muscovy so sadly lacked, and as such it resonated and continues to resonate with all people of goodwill. It was because of this yearning that his icon spoke to the Russian people so powerfully, and why they responded with prayer and veneration. Rublev's contemporaries sensed the icon's uniqueness from the time it was first placed in the iconostasis of Trinity Monastery. Pilgrims from all over Muscovy and beyond streamed in to see it. So you see there an example of how an icon can have such a positive effect on a community, on a church, and also on the society that we live in. So another book that I think is very valuable for you to have, and that's Techniques of Icon and Wall Painting, Egg Tempera, Fresco, and Secco by Aidan Hart. Aidan Hart is an English iconographer, and I've met him. He's wonderful. He's written this book, which it really it's basically almost like an encyclopedia of techniques, materials, and so forth. He goes quite into depth. Pigment characteristics, their tinting power, their toxicity, their opacity, historic and modern, about pigments. Generally, those pigments developed within the last 300 years are named modern, within the last 300 years, while those available before then are called historic. Very valuable information. Just talking about how, here's the eye, and how if you have a surface like this, which is what we achieve with our rose crush layer. Remember, it's all kind of swirled and other layers of color sink into it. So the eye looks at it, and when the light comes into it, it gives it more of a depth of experience. He talks, you probably won't need all this information, but it's there if you ever do need it. This is how to actually create an icon board if you start with a board and actually have a saw, which I don't have, but in other words, it is like an encyclopedia in that way, that if you want to know something, you can definitely look it up in here. Here he talks about the different types of strokes, gives you some examples of how to do folds. He talks about there's so many different ways of applying the paint, and in a class situation, I don't get to show you everything. So you could, if you go on retreat for a week or something and take some time and really look through this. Here's an example of highlights, which shows you how you could do this in a study, right? You could make a study like this in your on your watercolor paper and just become familiar with how to do highlights. Here he's showing it in detail too. As I've said many times, there are different styles and ways of doing highlights. You need to kind of experiment with it and then decide what works best for you. Greek terminology for paint layers, etc. I talked to you about that in class. That's the term used by Theophilus, the presbyter, for dark lines, usually made of black and red. But there's a lot more in here. And then examples of garments using different techniques. Here are some color recipes if you feel in need of that kind of thing. He has that in here. But this is the chapter that got me started with thinking I should really tell you more about this book. So this chapter 12 on varnishing is very, very, very detailed and complete, with much more information than you would ever need to know. I did recently do that video for you on varnishes, and I also did that article recently with some examples. So I've gone through his ideas here and come up with what works for me and shared that with you. But there are lots and lots of other alternatives which you could use. There's Damar varnish, which is a historic one. Copal, that does really darken with age, though. I've used Copal dryer, but not. It's also very poisonous. Drying oils. So there's, even if you used a linseed oil varnish, there's lots of other things that you can add to it to adjust it so that it's not quite so yellowing or difficult to dry. He also goes into here alkyd, dryers, which is a synthetic product, and alkyds are not designed to be used as a varnish. The main reason is that they produce a highly impermeable film and therefore do not allow oxygen to penetrate to the paint layer and cause the molecular linking that is essential for the full hardening of the paint. We've talked about that in class. I've talked about it in many of the classes I teach, that molecular linking that is so essential between the varnish and the paint layer. And we have, even with the egg tempera, the egg mixture forms a molecular bond with the glue in the gesso, again causing that kind of linking, which is what makes it so permanent. So again, this is much more information than you'll ever really need. He talks about how to do fresco, application plaster, layers for fresco. But you never know. I mean, it's here if you need it. It gives you really good examples of the different stages, which is very similar to icon painting with using egg tempera. Okay, so there's just one more book I'm going to tell you about. Okay, and the last book I'm going to tell you about, last but not least, is my book, Eyes of Fire, How Icons Saved My Life as an Artist. And you can get this on Amazon. But anyway, it's really kind of my story of being an artist and having a surprise encounter with icons, and being completely transformed by that encounter. And then that has led me to really do some serious research and thinking about what an icon is and how it affects our culture, the spiritual practice of writing icons. I make recommendations in here about books. The Glenn Stahl Book of Icons is a really good book to read. So one of the justifications for writing icons is they carry the invisible presence of God, so they can speak to people who are not normally open to receiving God or a spiritual perspective. And then I go into like the history of religious art making, and then understanding the spiritual and traditional cultures. And then chapter 5, Kandinsky was a Russian artist, and he was very influenced by icons. He grew up in Russia, and he wrote a book called Concerning the Spiritual in Art. And so I put a lot of the information in here because he's very aware of sacred geometry. He says, a quote from him, "No other power can take the place of art. At times when the human soul is gaining greater strength, art will grow in power, and the two are inextricably connected." He talks about his spiritual triangle, which represents a societal and personal progression from solely material to spiritual concerns, where the primary movement is influenced by artists and their work. So, to me, it seems that our world is very material, and it's up to us to provide spiritual food for them in terms of visual imagery. So, anyway, I put quite a lot of information about him in here. And then I also put information about the Renaissance, the cultural perspective of the Renaissance versus Cubism, because Cubism, really, you can see a lot of Cubism in icons, particularly modern icons. Paul Klee, Chagall with his storytelling from the Bible, Matisse is another one. So talk about that, and basically modern art, how basically building the practice or the the case that icons influence contemporary art. Contemporary art wouldn't even exist without icons, and that is shown in the works of the artists that I included in here. So that's one of the ideas behind how icons saved my life as an artist. And then art as prayer, how my practice with ancient art affects my work as a contemporary painter. And so it really has become a way of me encountering God through the visual image. And then in the back, there's the Holy Trinity. I have an appendix where I have important facts about the creating an icon. So this is Gifts from Byzantium, the Artist's Toolbox, and talking about perspective in the icon, color and light. I really go into detail into the different types of perspective in an icon, which I've never yet been able to get into one single class. So again, this is kind of a way of increasing your knowledge and amplifying and increasing what I'm able to give you in classes. The Greek key, we talk about that a lot in our classes. It's really essential. Polychromy, colorism, and then the different techniques, proplasmos technique, which is kind of the prosopon method, which I teach a lot, or the membrane technique, which is slightly different, which I teach sometimes. And in my online classes, you'll see that in descriptions, I'll say this one is the membrane technique, this one is proplasmos technique, because I created all those classes to give people different perspectives on ways that they could write an icon. How the icon style and plastic form developed. It's really important. So, and also golden mean, sacred geometry, what that is, why it's important. All of these things I think are essential facts and ideas that are essential to understanding and creating icons. And I've tried to make things that are fairly complex and complicated as simple as I can. Content and meaning. Okay, and it also, it's really kind of a chronicle of how icons have affected me as an artist and as a woman who loves God and loves to pray. So there you have it. I hope these will be helpful to you. I hope this is a resource that you can go back into and look at from time to time. If you find yourself a little bit stuck or confused about making your icons, you can go to one of these books and read a little bit and get re-inspired. Okay, God bless you all, and I hope you enjoy them.